us a new Connecticut economy. And that doesn't just mean for the cities or for the ring suburbs, but positive impact and job creation and a better economy for all of our cities and towns. And I think that's where it starts. Understanding that dynamic, that infrastructure, which includes critical transportation elements, train stations and the close by airports, and of course, then the highway system that connects us all, is a real part of it. You know, this is not news to anyone, but GE leaves a suburban campus in Connecticut to go to an urban center in Massachusetts, right? Aetna talks about leaving a city in Connecticut to go to another city. Lexion, after getting some $20 million from Connecticut, again, we're leaving and losing jobs. Part of it is, yes, the instability on a state government, which we, as Democrats, know we need to fix and create a vision and let people know that we're able to do it and get the background and the ability to do it. But part of it is, you know, how do we get around this state? In Fairfield County on I-95, it's a parking lot. And every part of the state has its challenges there. And on a softer note, I mean, we're all connected. This transportation fund thing, I know it talks about not seeing another Mianus River Bridge fall apart because it's saving infrastructure, but it's also building a better transportation infrastructure for the future. Lastly, part of it is, on a very tender note, and part of that transportation fund supports public transportation. I was at an event earlier today with Senator Blumenthal where there was a mother who, her and her daughter who has lupus, relies on the bus system, like so many of us really don't have to, thank God, only by the grace of God. And as that fund gets cut, and bus service or public transportation gets cut, people are affected, real people are affected, their lives change, and it's not for the better. So it's a bigger picture for all of us, certainly so that we can attract and retain jobs and have a better economy. But on a one-off, for those who are the most vulnerable with the greatest needs, it makes a difference. As Democrats, that's important to all of us. And I know it's got to be a part of what we care about, as I'm sure we all do at this table, and you do as well, and what we fight for in this election, because it's that important. If you get that Trump Republican in there, and we think it's bad now, as Democrats, not only going to be on our heels, we're going to be up against the wall, we'll be out the door. And that's not going to happen in Connecticut if we pull together. Thanks so much.
As I mentioned to you, one of the primary incentives that we deployed for Blueback Square, for West Hartford Center, for our growth in the area was transportation infrastructure. Public transportation, buses, moving cars around more efficiently, and bikes. So this has to be a centerpiece of what the next governor does. I do support electronic tolls. They should be on the table. But you got to figure out what the configuration is. You got to have a detailed plan to be able to react to. There are some configurations that will not work. You have to figure out how you're going to price them appropriately so that border towns, places, are not penalized, whether that's through scaled pricing or through tax credits and other ways to do it. It has to go to transportation. So as Susan said, lockbox is key. But we can't stop there, because we can't just continue to take a look at one revenue source and in its isolation. We have to have a holistic view of how we raise our revenue. So another thing we should look at is, if we're making the dollars off of electronic tolls, can we lower the gas tax or regressive tax? Maybe more people that are now zipping through our state will stop, buy gas, more people, lower cost, greater revenue, and they'll go into the convenience store and buy the burrito or something and generate some sales tax revenue at the same time. Bonding should be prioritized towards transportation, because transportation has such a large economic multiplier. And we've got to get creative with bonding. When we did Blueback Square, the public improvements were done through a $49 million bond issue. But we made them like revenue bonds. We used parking revenue to pay them back. So it was such a good model and a creative model that the bond rating agencies didn't even consider it part of our debt. There are creative ways that we can use bonding to structure things. And finally, it's not just about rail. That's important. I oppose the busway, because we could have done commuter rail between Hartford and Waterbury for a quarter of the cost and a much greater economic value and economic development value than the busway was. It's here, we have to make it work. But rail is important. High-speed rail is important. One of our biggest assets is the fact that we're between Boston and New York. We've got to stop trying to be like them and be all that we can be within what we have. but better connect into Boston and New York with high-speed rail, with fiber optics, both intra and outside, so that we can move people, products, ideas back and forth more efficiently and leverage that economic engine.
So I hosted a forum for Republican and Democratic leaders and senior executives from General Electric after General Electric announced that they were going to leave. And Ann Clay said quite clearly, GE is leaving because our folks cannot get to our Fairfield campus. It's a remote campus, suburban campus, and they can't get there. Transportation was number one. It wasn't taxes. Okay, it was our dysfunctional government. We didn't have a great relationship between Hartford and GE, but she said it is transportation. So this is priority one, and I can get it done, I think. Look, I appreciate that when it comes to how you pay for transportation upgrades, electronic tolling is, I think, pretty unanimous here. But you gotta be able to sell it in the legislature. And there's not one Republican in the legislature that will support this right now. They think the politicians are gonna squander it, waste the money, it's another tax, whatever it might be. We've helped line up all of the leading business leaders in this state. They are going to line up. They're going to say if this money is devoted to transportation, they're going to sign up behind electronic tolling, and they're going to sign up for a really significant transportation upgrade that allows Connecticut to compete in the 21st century. So by working with people across the aisle, working with the business community, we will get this passed. I got to tell my friends, we got to be a little careful. I mean, electronic tolling, that money is supposed to go to roads and bridges and upgrade of that piece of the transportation infrastructure, but we'll be able to also find ways to make sure that public transit is so important, so that young people and their elderly are not shut in, they can get around, and folks can get to work. That is what is such a priority. I do want to say one other thing. My friend Guy said we're all up here, he's the only guy that's not a career politician. I think Sean may have an objection to that, if I had to make a guess. But I'll just tell you, I come from a different background. It's true, I was elected 4 times in our hometown, but I'm somebody, the only person who's really comes from a business background that's run for state, to be governor in the last 60 or 70 years. And somebody who started up a business and created jobs. And somebody who can talk about why it's so important that transportation, education, these are the things that are going to help our economy grow. And this is how you get the business community back involved and positive about this state. I'm so tired of the business community bad-mouthing the state of Connecticut. I want to get them back involved, constructive going forward. And I think I give us the best chance to do that, best chance to get the Republicans and the Democrats in the legislature to realize the crisis confronting the state, to work together, and electronic tolling will be step number 1.
I said earlier I wasn't going to raise taxes. Tolls are a tax. Tolls annoy people. I don't want to run a government that annoys people. But there's a way to do this. All of my colleagues up here are in favor of tolls. $800 million in revenue. $800 million of tax, of your tax. You want to pay $800 million more? There's a way to do this, so we don't have to. And people from Massachusetts and New York do. Specific. You have one of the debit card companies give every taxpayer in the state a debit card. You pay your tolls on it all year long. At the end of the year, you paid $416 in tolls. They roll it up. They file it electronically with the Department of Revenue Services that you paid $416. And when you file your state tax return, whether it's a 1040 easy or a 1040 itemized, you get a $416 tax credit. And people say that's not legal. You live on Staten Island, you go across the Verrazano, you pay that much toll. You or I go across the Verrazano, we pay this much toll. We can do this. Since I started talking about taxes and said, raising the gas tax is a bad idea. That's at Hartford again. Oh, we're going to raise taxes or kill teachers. It's the only solution, right? It's the only solution you hear when you go to Hartford. No, you lower the gas tax. And since I started saying that, everybody but Ned said, yeah, they agree with that. Now, come on, Ned, you gotta step up here. But here's what you do. You lower the gas tax 12 cents. You can do the arithmetic on this. Now, it won't generate as much revenue, maybe, but here's what it will do. All those huge rigs that are driving through our state on 84 and 95, they are told by the trucking companies that own those trucks, the drivers are told you may not stop and buy gas in Connecticut because it costs too much. You got to do it in New York or in Massachusetts. You lower it 12 cents, those same trucking companies will instruct their drivers, you must buy gas in Connecticut. And while they're pumping 100 gallons 3 times a week into those huge tanks, they'll go inside and buy a sandwich and a coffee and pay sales tax, which generates revenue that's not out of your pocket. It's a third way. This is the only way to solve these problems. So with third ways, not more taxes on people, we will lose to the red hats. We will lose to the red hats if we do not pay attention to what they are saying. You talk to people all over this state, and they have had it with Hartford and had it with more taxes, and they're looking for a different way that's better. Thank you.
I don't know whether I'm a career politician or not, but having actually had to face real challenges in government, which is not like running a business, one of the things I've learned is that you're better off telling people the truth. You're better off being straight about it, whether it's what they want to hear or not. Tolls may annoy people. They're a lot less annoying today than they used to be because you don't actually have to go through a toll booth. You just drive and don't even slow down. But what really annoys people is when bridges fall down or when you don't know whether your commute is going to take you 45 minutes or 2.5 hours, or whether the jobs leave because they're looking for that transportation infrastructure. And I wish that I could tell you we could do all those things and keep our revenue neutral, but it's not true. We need more revenue in order to make the investments that are going to allow us to grow. And so I do support tolls, and I also am not going to tell you that we're going to offset that revenue from tolls by lowering the gas tax. If you're going to do that, what's the point of doing tolls in the first place? Our transportation fund is currently bankrupt, which is why $4.5 billion of transportation initiatives have been put on ice. If you want to change that, much as we may wish it wasn't true, we need new revenue. So we do need tolls. I'm not going to try to create an expectation that people aren't going to feel it. I do think it's one way that we can get all those folks who travel through our state, both residential and commercial traffic, and there's an awful lot of it, to pay their fair share. So I think we should be straightforward about it, and we shouldn't try to hide it. And let me just talk about why it is so important. A number of people have said it. I agree absolutely about GE. But it's not just about hanging on to what we've got. There's tremendous growth opportunity. You know, you've got companies that are starting up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and in Brooklyn, New York. They cannot afford to scale up there. So when they look for a place where they're going to start scaling up those businesses, they're going to look first and foremost at the places nearby. And if you've got a transportation system that works, then all of a sudden the Route 8 corridor, which has so much old, vacant industrial property, that becomes a real option for people. And on the flip side, when you're growing up in a place, whether you're talking about Roxbury or Danbury, or whether you're talking about Hartford or anywhere in between, the transportation system is what decides how far you can look for your labor market opportunities. And so when we talk about keeping our young people, it's also about that. It's about what allows them to get down to that job. Maybe that job's in Norwalk, but can they get there in a time that allows them to live a decent quality life? This is why this issue is so important, and why we should be willing to be honest about what we've got to do to fix it, because this is the definition of what an investment in the future is.
Connecticut public education is more dependent on the property tax than almost any other state. Does this need to change, and if so, how? And we'll start with Sean.
Thank you. You know, we need to make some changes when it comes to our education, and I talk about it in my economic plan as well. First, our public school education, statewide. You know, we currently are operating under this ECS formula. Many people don't know what it is. It's hard to really figure out what it is and how it's implemented. But the first thing we need to do with our formula is to fully fund it. You know, we're $300+ million away from fully funding that so that we can ensure that we're getting the funding to our towns and cities all around the state to ensure that our children have a fair education no matter where you live here in the state. Recently, the legislature has looked at the formula and talked about a couple of different factors, adding a weight factor for English learners, adding a weight factor for poverty, and so that we can see how that goes and gets implemented moving forward to ensure that we're getting the funding to where the students need it the most. You know, we have to look at our property tax. We have to look at our relationship between state government and our towns and cities all across the state. You know, one of the things we have to look at is a recognition that our municipal aid has gone down and may go down in the future. And so finding those alternate ways to fund education, both from our towns and cities and through the ECS formula, is going to be critical. We have to do it by finding efficiency in our government operations, like we did at the Department of Veterans Affairs when I was the commissioner. You know, our budget went down each year, our resources were reduced each year, but we found different ways to get things done. We found ways to bring military and corporate experiences to bear to lean our operations so that we're not laying off people, but we're doing more with, in fact, with less. But education also, we have to look at from the higher educational level. And in my economic plan, I talk about that. I don't talk about free college for all, and I'll tell you why. Because number one, I don't think it's true that it is free. When you talk about New York system, they have thousands in fees sometimes, and so it's not free. Second is I don't think we can afford it. But what can we do? We can use our tax dollars much more wisely to target investments in education. We can offer, as I suggest, loan forgiveness for students here in Connecticut who are going to go for that associate's degree or go for that vocational and technical certification that relates to the talent gaps that we have. We heard earlier, we have thousands of jobs. We have over 13,000 jobs in manufacturing open right now, with tens of thousands more coming. And so targeting our dollars to loan forgiveness for those who are going to get those jobs. And you know what, I visited on my jobs tour the Quinebaug Valley Community College, where I saw firsthand students going through the Advanced Manufacturing Center, where within one semester they're getting an internship at $14+ an hour, and within 2 semesters, jobs at $20 and up to $28 an hour at the electric boats, at the Pratt & Whitney's, at the sporting suppliers all across the state. And so we've got to look at both of those when we're talking about education, both our public schools and our higher education as well. Thank you.
So I agree. I mean, the over-reliance on property taxes in Connecticut to fund public education is not only counterintuitive and regressive, but there's no formula in anybody's mind that can support it. On a constitutional basis, every student, I believe anyways, I know the Supreme Court may disagree, but guarantees everyone a quality education, public education in Connecticut. Led a lawsuit years ago to do that, and it wasn't to take money away from our better performing school districts and to give it to our less affluent, but it was to fully fund, whether it's the ECS formula or education in general, to every young person in Connecticut, regardless of the city and town they live in, are given the, what I like to think is God-given opportunity for good quality education. In the Bridgeport district, 22,000 students speaking some 57 languages. Of course, all the challenges of overcrowded classrooms. I have to understand and address the tender issues of not only good quality pay for good quality teachers, but the student-teacher ratios, the goal of universal preschool, and then the ability for all of our young people to have the opportunity to higher education. I mean, whether it's a goal towards free college education, I'm for that, and we need to make that a goal for our state government. New York can do it. New York can do it. What's wrong with the students? What's wrong with young people in Connecticut? Shouldn't they be given? Shouldn't we provide them that same opportunity to make our state as competitive as New York is? Lastly, when we were trying to woo Amazon here, and New Haven and New Haven and Bridgeport got together, and we looked at the dynamics of our great state and parts of it. One of the things they wanted was to invest in higher education systems in Connecticut with a curriculum that they would support, private sector support, for the type of quality education or focused education they wanted to feed the jobs that they were going to bring to Connecticut if we were so lucky. And so that's the kind of dynamic between the education that provides, certainly I think at a higher level, it's the community colleges that we're doing in some degree, and our universities providing that which will tie into the jobs that can be created and those that we want to attract to Connecticut, they're a part of the future. But the over-reliance on property taxes, whether it's in Roxbury or in Bridgeport, just doesn't work, it doesn't make sense. It is not the formula we want. We want it to be focused and distributed in a fair way on a state level, providing for students and school districts throughout Connecticut. At least that's my view. Thanks.
The perennial question that we were always able to paper over when there was more revenue, when there was more money, this toxic relationship between the state and the local government. I was on the Property Tax Reform Commission back in 2001, and we at that point looked at a bunch of studies that we blew the dust off of on the shelves. Now they're blowing the dust off of that study. It's time to implement some things. We know what the answers are. And what you do, you need a governor, like I've been able to govern in the past, that can bring people together. A lot of this has to do with the executive branch being able to deal with the legislative branch, like I did between the school and the town side in West Hartford. I will tell you, I spent 12 years in the legislature. The Andrew McDonald situation, that disgrace would not have happened. That was horrible. Getting shut out of the budget room, that would not have happened. I not only know where the bathrooms are in the General Assembly, I know where the people are, I know who they are, I know the policies, and I know the process. As far as the actual revenue situation, we always talk about revenue as one-off. This is what we're going to do with this piece. Let's take a holistic view, take a step back, look at how we raise money across the board, hand it off to some experts with certain principles. People should pay their fair share, more progressivity, less regressivity. Let's look at taxes not only in a quantitative way, like we always do to get through a budget, but qualitatively. What are the taxes that are incentives for people, families, and businesses to come and stay in Connecticut and reorganize in that way, the property tax being part of it. ECS, Sean's right, I've seen it. We've never fully funded it. The formula might be broken, but we don't even know if it is. We have to fully fund that. And we can free up the dollars, like I did in West Hartford as mayor, to focus on education. That those same lessons can be used by avoiding redundancies, by streamlining, by working with employees, by moving agencies in with one another. We moved our town side and our board side into one building, saved $300,000 in facilities costs, and by the way, it forced people to talk to each other. Go figure that. To solve problems. So there are a lot of things we can do, but it's not just money. Some challenged school districts do better than others. Best practices, leadership qualities, ways that you go about doing things, that can make as much difference in a buck and how you spend the buck. We need to go beyond that. Reduce unfunded mandates to towns. We need to take a look at other mechanisms where towns, like we did in West Hartford, became more efficient within the town to avoid those redundancies. And although, as First Selectman Edelson knows, there's a lot that's been done in sharing costs across municipal borders, a more robust system of carrots and sticks to spread costs out and save money so we can focus on the most important investment in our kids, in education, skills, and training.
All right, so I want to be the education governor. I think it's the most important investment we can make. We don't have oil and gas, we don't have silicon, we have the quality of our workforce. It's the civil rights issue of our day. The yawning achievement gap between schools like here and schools other places is just devastating and fundamentally unfair. But can I just take a brief reality timeout? This state is facing billion-dollar deficits as far as the eye can see. And I appreciate everybody, we're gonna fully fund and we're gonna less rely on the property tax. But I think you ought to ask us all a little bit more specifically about what we plan to do going forward, given the nature of the crisis we're confronting. I am talking about taking our revenue structure as we have it in the state into the 21st century. And I'm sorry, it would involve adding new revenues to what we gotta do so we can really invest in early childhood education and after school activities and community college for those that are getting that tech skill, and to make sure we can get the best teachers in our most distressed schools by forgiving their student loans so that they have an incentive to go into a place like Harding High, where I used to be a volunteer teacher. And one of the things I would do is I'd look at the fact that the sales tax used to apply to 80% of our economy and used to raise about 80% of the revenue we needed to fund the state of Connecticut. That was a generation ago. Today, our sales tax applies to less than half of our economy. It doesn't apply to services. It doesn't apply to e-commerce, except in certain circumstances. It doesn't apply to digital downloads. Let me tell you what I mean by that. You know, when I was younger, you know, I'd go rent a movie at Blockbuster, and I'd pay 6% on that. Well, today, you download it off of Amazon or iTunes, and you don't really pay anything on that. There's no more Blockbuster. There's no more Sam Goodies. There's no more of those bookstores. A lot of our Main Street businesses are no longer able to compete. That's impacting our property tax in towns like Roxbury and elsewhere. And it's also killing the amount of sales revenue we have that allows us to honor all the great promises I hear from these people as we want to invest in education. So I think that not only do we have to bring our workforce into the 21st century, not only do we have to bring our transportation infrastructure into the 21st century, we're also going to have to bring our revenue structure to the 21st century so we can make the investments we need to help this state grow. Thank you.
We are losing people from this state at an alarming rate, and we need to reverse that. I think we need to recruit millennials into the state. Parents all over the state tell me, my kid goes away to college and they won't come home. You know how IBM goes to Ohio State and says, come work for us, we're a great company. The state of Connecticut needs to do that, but not with a brochure. What we need to do is say to those millennials, you come here and we'll provide you a first-time home buyer credit. Or if you already live in Connecticut and never owned a home, you get a first-time home buyer credit. Now what does that do? It obviously brings people into the state who are going to pay state taxes and sales taxes, but it also helps stabilize the property tax in rural areas, in suburban areas, and in inner cities. Now, there's another component of this. We have to keep bringing people in. We do have jobs. We don't have people to be in the jobs sometimes. Think about this, the North Street Tool and Die Company. There are hundreds of those kind of companies across the state that support the defense industry. North Street Tool and Die, been around 25 years, has 25 employees. The owners are 63, husband and wife, thinking about retirement. They need $400,000 to buy some new equipment to keep making this fancy part for Sikorsky helicopters. They go to the bank and the bank says, sure, we'll loan you $400,000. But it's got to be a personal note. Oh, hello, we're thinking about retirement. So they don't do it. And they lose the Sikorsky contract. Instead of 25 employees, they have 13 and just dug the hole deep. So what do? You put 1,000 North Street Tool and Die companies across the state into a consortium. You work with the bank. Spread the credit, spread the risk. And then underpin it, all of it, with the credit of the state of Connecticut. Now, everything I just said doesn't cost you 10 cents, but what it does do is provide access to capital for hundreds of small businesses who will hire those more employees, build a new building, buy more trucks, put more tax money into the economy, again, without raising your taxes. These are the kind of things that we have to do and have to think about. What I'm talking about with the asset of the state of Connecticut doesn't add more risk. It is a modern, sophisticated financial use of an asset that we already own. This is the way we need to run this state in this century, not the last century. Thank you.
So the question is about education. And I want to try to give you some very detailed answers. I agree with what Ned said. We have big deficits. And even if you do some of the things that folks have talked about to generate more revenue, that's not going to give us more money to spend on things we already do. It's going to help close our gap. And we have to be, again, we have to be willing to say that. So here's what I'd say on education. I wish I could tell you that there was gonna be more money coming to each of these towns. I think that's probably not gonna happen. But here's what I do think every town here and everywhere in the state deserves, which I do think can happen. Predictability about what you're gonna get. You know, everybody talks about the ECS formula, the education cost per sharing formula, and says that we're not fully funding it. The more fundamental problem is there is no real formula, because it just gets changed because nobody ever wants to, formula gets tweaked every year to make sure that nothing actually changes. As a result of that, if you're a local board of ed or you're a local finance commission, you don't know what you're gonna get until in many cases after you've already adopted your budget. We saw how devastating that was to communities last year. So we have to adopt a formula and stick to that formula. And I will tell you straight up, I think that formula should put a strong emphasis on putting resources where the needs are highest. That means you've gotta spend more where you have higher number of kids who are English language learners. You've gotta spend more where you've got higher concentrations of kids who have special education needs. You've gotta spend more where you have districts where 99% of the students are on free and reduced lunch. Because the reality is it takes more to be successful there. And when we talk about the achievement gap, we should be clear, this is a statewide shame. We are in one of the wealthiest states in the country, and we have the largest achievement gap. It is a moral outrage for our state. And we have to be willing to make sure that we got a formula that helps us move the ball forward on that. So I do think we need a formula that does that. I think the formula needs to be then honored so that you know what you've got to work with and budget. Now here's the second thing. A lot of people talk about ECS as if it's the only aid that local communities get. There's another big piece, which is special education funding. For small towns especially, special education can be the thing that breaks the year or breaks the budget for the year. Because a small amount of change in the number of students or the intensity of their need can completely throw your budget out of whack. It's a huge source of volatility. So on a statewide basis, we should be adopting a sort of pooled approach, where based on past, it's sort of like an insurance approach to special education, where based on past experience, you pay a fixed amount in every year, the state makes sure you get what you need to do it, but you have paid your fixed amount, and it's not a big variable that goes out of whack up or down year to year. That, I think, will make a big difference for communities to actually be able to plan and do what they need to do. Thank you.
I guess it won't surprise you if I say we should fully fund educational cost sharing. But it's very clear we need to reform our property tax system. You have towns like Greenwich, their mill rate is 11. I live in Middletown, our mill rate is 37. There are distressed municipalities that have mill rates in excess of 50. And Hartford and Bridgeport are two of the poorest of the top 12 cities per capita in our entire country. And we have a huge achievement gap. So how do we fix that? We have to invest in public education. And I am a huge supporter of public education. I'm a product of public education. I went to public school in Middletown, K through 12. My kids went to the same schools and even had some of the same teachers. Yeah. So we have to support our young people, particularly with universal pre-K, because that is one of the best ways to reduce the achievement gap. And all of the support that comes with after-school programs and that kind of support. It's also really important that we have a pipeline from school to work. Young people need to know what the options are. A lot of young people and parents don't know that you can make a great living if you become an electrician or a plumber or a glazer or enter another one of the building trades. We have to make sure our young people know about those opportunities. And we have to make sure that our young people know that when they go to a community and technical school and get their advanced manufacturing degree at a community college, they have a great job waiting for them at one of our companies like Electric Boat. Same with a public college and university. So we need a governor who's going to be building partnerships between the business community and our colleges and community technical schools. And we ought to be looking at ways to make community college and college more affordable. How do we do that? It's been mentioned. New York has done it. Let young people know if they have financial need, that if we close the hedge fund loophole, we will raise $520 million a year, and that will pay for community college for kids who need it. And then off they go to a state college and or university after they finish those 2 years. Thank you so much.
We are now approaching 15 minutes left in this program, and we've done, I think, 3 questions. So I had hoped to get in 5, and I think that I was optimistic, to say the least. I'm going to do a lightning round question. I'm looking for a yes or no answer. Speaking of taxes, if the legislature sends you a bill legalizing recreational use of marijuana, will you sign it? Let's start with Joe, because he's next up to start.
Yes.
John?
Yes, depends on how it's regulated. I regulate medical.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
If they send me the bill, I'll sign it, but I say we gotta lay out what the costs are gonna be as well, so that it's aired in a hearing.
Okay. Wow, that was the closest to a short answer from someone running for office that I have ever seen. All right. We have a real issue here, which is that Connecticut just simply does not seem to be the place where young people are going. And I have a question from someone who's a college senior who says he or she says their job prospects are slim and the cost of living is high, and asked what you would do to help young adults in this situation. I can tell you that I have a daughter at the University of Minnesota, and when she last boarded a plane, when the TSA guy asked where she was going, and she said back home to Connecticut, his question was, why? All right, so why Connecticut? Why is this the best place to start a business, raise a family, and make... No, this is not a yes or no. I'm out of that. Why is Connecticut the best place to raise a family, start a business, and what would you say to this young person as to how we would do that? And I think we're going to start with John.
How many minutes?
We're going to give this one 2 minutes because we're running out of time. So adjust your thing to 2. Thank you.
That's easy in 2 minutes. Ready? I had a problem ourselves. Lucy and I, our son Spencer graduated UConn. He's back at home, which is a blessing and otherwise. But all of his opportunities are Boston or New York. So one of the things, going back to the bottom-up economic development, that not only creates jobs, it not only expands the tax base, we've seen it throughout West Hartford, which is now the regional focus, it also creates the neighborhoods, both there and the ripple effect. The millennials want to live in West Hartford now. We can do this throughout the state with this bottom-up economic development, whether it's the Naugatuck Valley or other areas where we have older factory buildings, places on rail, what we call bones in the real estate business, to be able to get investment to and to build up. So that's crucial. Why here? Because this is a great state. Look at our assets, an educated and skilled workforce. Our location, as I talked about, between Boston and New York. Health indices, we're near the top when it comes from mental and physical health. We have